The big story in Milwaukee right now is the fact that it appears, knock on wood, fingers crossed, saying a little prayer, that in fact the unrest, the chaos, the riots have died down. That the Milwaukee Police Department really was able to get a handle on things last night. Give credit to Milwaukee's Mayor Tom Barrett for instituting a 10 p.m. curfew. It's actually technically already on the books. One wonders why it's not more aggressively enforced the other 364 days of each year, but that's another story. It was aggressively enforced last night. Milwaukee police made no bones about the fact that if you were on the streets, you were under the age of 18, you were going to be taken in and possibly subject to arrest. Another great decision, Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark shut down Sherman Park, basically ground zero for the protests that spilled into riots on Saturday night and again on Sunday night, where there wasn't a riot so much as a small group of people waiting to start rioting. Sheriff Clark made a great decision in basically cordoning off the entire park, staffing it with Milwaukee County Sheriff's deputies, putting a large Milwaukee police presence there under the direction of Chief Flynn to ensure that nobody was able to gather in this park. It seemed to have worked. In 2 nights, we have not needed the deployment of the National Guard, and thank goodness, we have, in fact, peace on our city. Looks like we do finally have peace on the streets, and that is a credit to the law enforcement officers who work tirelessly and diligently and put themselves in harm's way in an effort to keep the streets safe. You have to understand, Saturday was one of the most dangerous nights in this city's history. Certainly one of the most dangerous nights since the last major riot in Milwaukee in 1967. This was a once-in-a-half-century type of incident. And the thing that absolutely amazes me about all of this is, at its essence, all of the chaos, all of the rioting, everything, it all basically boiled down to 2 men. 2 men. That's what all of this came down to. That's what all of this was about. All of the rioting, all of the arson, all of the looting, all over 2 men. All over the choices those 2 men made in life and in the instant their lives crossed and changed Milwaukee forever. One of those men chose to live his life in service to others, the other in service to himself. One of those men chose to give back to the community they both shared, the other chose to take from it. 2 men, 2 lifestyles, 2 lives forced together by the consequences of 2 sets of choices. Sylville Smith was a career criminal whose juvenile convictions include retail theft, car theft, defrauding an innkeeper, and resisting arrest. When he turned 18, he was cited for possession of marijuana, then arrested for an armed robbery and driving with a suspended license. He wasn't prosecuted, but later that year, he was arrested for resisting an officer. 3 years ago, he was again arrested for retail theft, then apparently began selling drugs. He was arrested for possession of heroin with intent to deliver, possession of marijuana, carrying a concealed weapon, and driving while suspended. All of the charges against him were dismissed, except the count of driving while suspended, for which he served 1 day in jail. Last year, he was arrested for first-degree recklessly endangering safety, intimidating a witness, possession of marijuana, driving with a suspended license, and driving after his license was revoked. In December, he was arrested for carrying a concealed weapon, and in April, he was arrested for possession of cocaine. But again, all of the charges against him were for one reason or another dismissed. Less than a month ago, he was arrested again for possession of cocaine. In his 23 years, Smith was arrested 13 times, but as an adult served just 1 day in jail. He was, by all accounts, a thug, but a lucky one who was the beneficiary of a criminal justice system that seemed to want to keep him on the streets. As the years progressed, his crimes grew more serious, his choices grew more dangerous, until one final choice ended his life. On Saturday, Smith and a friend were pulled over. Perhaps recognizing that his cocaine possession arrest just a few weeks earlier would mean an immediate trip to jail, Smith chose to run. And he chose to run with a stolen gun in his hand. The officer who pulled him over had no choice. He undoubtedly saw the gun in Smith's hand and knew he had to give chase. He knew that he had to protect the community that Smith was running into. He knew he had to keep that community safe. Within a few seconds, Smith chose to run into a backyard, but unfortunately for him, it was fenced in. Smith was trapped. As the officer closed in, Smith chose to turn around and face him with the gun in his hand. The officer had no choice. He saw the gun. He saw the suspect turn toward him with it in his hand. He had to shoot. That officer is 24 years old. Like Smith, he's a black man. Like Smith, he grew up in Milwaukee. In fact, Smith's sister says the two men went to high school together just 6 years ago and knew each other back then. That officer, he made choices too. After high school, he chose to work for the Milwaukee Police Department. At 18, when Smith chose to continue breaking the law, he chose to help enforce it. 3 years ago, when Smith chose to allegedly shoot a man and then intimidate him into refusing to testify against him, the officer chose to enter the Milwaukee Police Academy. As soon as he turned 21 and was old enough to, he chose to become a police officer. He chose to risk his life to protect his community from people like his old high school classmate. 2 men, 1 community, 1 high school, 2 sets of choices, 2 lives on 2 divergent paths that crossed on one sunny Saturday afternoon. 2 men, 1 traffic stop, 1 choice to steal a gun, 1 choice to run, 1 choice to turn around with gun in hand, 1 millisecond that led to one of the longest, darkest nights in Milwaukee's history. We are all both the victims and beneficiaries of our own choices in life. We can choose to be police officers, or we can choose to be criminals. We can choose to riot and burn our community in the dead of night, or we can choose to clean up the next morning. We can choose to make a martyr out of a man who chose to run and demonize the man who had no choice but to chase him. We can choose to glorify the man who chose to victimize his community and destroy that community in his honor. Or we can choose to clean up. We can choose to rebuild. We can choose to stand in solidarity with the man who chose to dedicate his life to keeping his community safe. We can stand in solidarity with all men and all women who have made that same choice, who chose a life that gives them no choice but to serve even when their community is burning. We can accept that they don't always make the right choice, that they, like us, have to live with every choice that they make. But we can choose to accept that they are the line that holds back the flames of chaos, not just on Saturday night, but every night and every day that they choose to risk their lives for ours. Sylville Smith made his choices in life, and those choices led him to his death. We can pretend that he had no choice, that circumstance and not free will guided his lifestyle, that the plight of his community dictated the path of his life, but he grew up in the same circumstance, lived in the same community as another man who saw the consequences of Smith's choices and chose for himself a different path. He chose to serve Milwaukee, not victimize it. He chose to give of himself to his community, not take for himself from it. And now, Milwaukee, we face a choice. Do we stand up for the man who chose to stand up for us? Do we stand with the people like him who work every day to make our community a safer, better place? Or do we choose to let our community burn with anger and hatred and stand instead with those who lit the match? The choice is ours, Milwaukee, and ours alone. And it's a choice that we will live with forever. I am Dan O'Donnell, in for Vicky McKenna on News Talk 1130 WISN.
Look at these niggas. Get this shit long. They lying down in the middle, bro. The one black man in the middle. Black man in the middle. How you gonna do it to that? Big ear on. See some cameras going.
What's happening?
What's it like? Chaos, what's going on, cuz? Kill my niggas.
Why it sound like something going on over
Y'all need
here?
helmets. They ain't got enough helmets. Cause why y'all niggas shit gonna be split? Get some more helmets down here.
Gear for y'all.
Get some gear for them. That's what I'm talking about. Bring the shields in.
Y'all bring the shield. Let's get it.
Y'all gonna need more than the shield.
Hey, y'all use them for the inmates. We not inmates. We out of jail. Y'all use them for the inmates. They can't do nothing for us.
You want the tough guys on.
Y'all gonna shoot or arrest?
We not moving. We not moving. Don't nobody move. Y'all need to come down here right now. On charge of career.
Y'all gonna come out shooting. Hey, it's hang. Just fuck that, huh?
I said that's why they going down. Don't run. We run this way. We run this way.
Why, what the fuck y'all running for?
They got shields.
Today.
Nigga, what I tell you?
'em not doing nothing.
I knew it. Fucking knew it.
Come on now.
That's a fire.
Ain't nobody.
Somebody did a fire.
Ain't no setup. Ain't no setup. Ain't nobody shooting shit. Ain't nobody shooting shit. Ain't no setup. So don't pull nothing out. No, y'all ain't that motherfucking careful. No, y'all
Right,
ain't.
but doing dumbass shit. Pillow bitch ass niggas.
Y'all know they scary, so y'all gotta be cool.
This is
Y'all gotta be cool. Y'all know they scary.
1028 News Talk 1130 WISN. That opening monologue, two men, two life choices, one city burns. Available now on the Common Sense Central page, newstalk1130.com. I am Dan O'Donnell, sitting in for Vicky McKenna this morning. You can also find that piece, my thoughts on how our choices can literally impact an entire city, even choices that we make in a millisecond. The choice of Seville K. Smith to turn around with a gun in his hand not only cost him in his life, but cost 6 people, 6 companies, their businesses, cost countless dozens of people, if not hundreds, their jobs, as those businesses need to be rebuilt from scratch, cost how many people their livelihoods. One decision leading to a chain reaction of hundreds of people's decision to go out and riot, to go out and burn, to go out and loot. It's amazing to think about that all of this was from one decision. Really a lifestyle, a life of bad decisions.
Best decision you ever made. Get your ass out of here too, man. Hey, circle them now. Circle them and make them uncomfortable. Make them uncomfortable now.
Our street! Our street! Our street!
Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! Our street! They gotta be careful though. These kids out here, right? If they get scared and get the shooting shit, the little shorties get popped and shit. If it was just us, it'd be different. Got up out of here quick.
Hey, you back out on the street.
Man, listen.
Who you talking about?
Shit, you talking about the dread nigga?
ain't mad about that shit. What?
Nobody got no liquor. Fuck these songs. Tear that bitch up. Tear that bitch up. Tear that bitch up. Tear that bitch up. Fuck this bitch! Take this bitch up! Get that body out that bitch! Get the truck! Get the truck! That's what's on the field! When you kill my cousin, bitch! That's
Hey, yeah. They finna crash into each other and shit.
Fuck them, man, ain't no siren.
I ain't running shit.
They out here beating up, breaking everything. On functioning, they got the gas station blown. This gas station finna blow up. They out here going crazy. Oh, they fighting. They out here beating that car up.
Do not come down Sherman for a while.
They out here fighting too. Oh. Hey, out here. Out here. They busting, fighting.
Can't do this shit by myself.
They shooting folks! Don't let me get hit!
Get over here!
12 out here! 12 out here! They out here! Out here. 12.
1048 News Talk 1130 WISN. Dan O'Donnell in for Vicki McKenna. Tom in Oak Creek. You're on WISN.
Hey, Dan, you know what? It takes a village. And I'm going to tell you, I got a couple things to say here. It takes a village, number one. Number two, the only one that's even making any kind of sense out of all of this is the father of this thug. Okay? He put some of the blame on himself.
Sylville Smith's father, the 23-year-old shot and killed by a Milwaukee police officer Saturday, yes, did have a very long criminal record, even though he seemed to get a deferred prosecution every single time he was charged with something. He served a grand total of 1 day in jail. Obviously, his juvenile records are sealed. I was able to get his a portion of his juvenile record through some sources that I have. But it seems like every single time he got a break from the system. I actually looked at all the things he was charged with. He should have been in prison.
Dan, are you talking about the son, or are you talking about the father?
I'm talking about Sylville Smith. You're right. The father, Patrick Smith.
He's making sense.
The father was...
Said, you know what, I haven't been a role model for my kid. I've been in and out of jail. I did a good job as a parent. And you know what, he's the only one that's making any sense. And why I say it takes a village? I moved up to Wisconsin from Chicago 21 years ago. My kids' friends still come over to the house. And nowadays, because they're all older, they come over and have a beer with me just to shoot the crap with me.
You know, and that is exactly what a father should do. Patrick Smith, the father of Sylville Smith, who did have a very lengthy criminal record himself, went on Fox 6 with reporter A.J. Bayatpour yesterday.
As neighbors discussed the previous night, Patrick Smith arrives at the scene. His son, 23-year-old Sylville Smith, is the suspect shot dead Saturday, sparking the violent outbursts.
You playing a part in their fault. If you know there's a reason, don't give in to their hand. Don't be running around going get guns. Don't let them shoot each other and wait on them to shoot y'all, because that's all they doing.
Smith says he takes some of the responsibility for his son's death.
And they looking at their dad like he's doing all these things. I just got out of jail probably 2 months ago, but I've been going back and forth in jail, and they see these things. So I'm like to apologize to my kids, because this is the role model they look up to.
This is an extended quote from Patrick Smith, posted at fox6now.com. He was a little difficult to understand because he was talking so fast. Here's what he said. What are we going to do now? Everyone playing their part in this city, blaming the white guy or whatever, and we know what they're doing. Like, already I feel like they should have never okayed guns in Wisconsin. They already know what our black youth was doing anyway. These young kids got to realize this is all a game with them, like they're playing Monopoly. You young kids falling into their world, what they want you to do. Everything you do is programmed. I had to blame myself for a lot of things too, because your hero is your dad, and I played a very big part in my family's role model for them. Being on the street, doing things of the street life, entertaining, drug dealing, and pimping, and they're looking at their dad like he's doing all these things. I got out of jail 2 months ago, but I've been going back and forth in jail, and they see those things, so I'd like to apologize to my kids, because this is the role model they look up to.
Look at him! Look at him! Look at him! Look at him! Teamwork! 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 Look at him! Look at him! Teamwork! Look at him! Look at him! Look at him! Teamwork! Teamwork! Teamwork!
Why is it, young people, that you'll use the word teamwork when it's all about destroying your own neighborhoods, destroying your own families, killing each other, celebrating gun violence, and killing other black people? You can't say the cops are doing anything against you. You've been demoralized by voting Democrat. Voting Democrat has caused you to turn on yourself and destroy yourselves in your neighborhoods, and even celebrate it and relish it, just like the Klu Klux Klan used to relish it when they attacked other blacks. Now you are doing what the Klu Klux Klan used to do. You're calling yourselves the N-word, just like the Klu Klux Klan, because you voted Democrat, which is the very political party that created the Klu Klux Klan.
Teamwork! Look at him! Teamwork! Look at him! Teamwork!
When they see the wrong role model, this is what you get. They got us killing each other, and then they even okayed them pistols, and they okayed a reason to kill us too. Now, somebody got killed reaching for his wallet, but now they can say he got a gun on him and they reached for it, and that's justifiable. When we allowed them to say guns is good and it's legal, we can bear arms. This is not the wild, wild west, y'all. But when you go down to 25th and Center, you see guys with guns hanging out this long. That's ridiculous. And they're allowing them to do this, and the police know half of them don't have a license to carry a gun. I don't know when we're going to start moving. I've got to start with my kids, and we got to change our ways to be better role models, and we got to change ourselves. We've got to talk to them, put some sense into them. They targeting us, but we know about it, so there's no reason to keep saying it's their fault. You play a part in it. If you know where there's a reason, don't give in to the hand. Don't be going around with big guns. Don't be going around shooting each other and letting them shoot y'all, because that's just what they're doing, and they're out to destroy us, and we're falling for it. That's Patrick Smith, the father of Seville Smith, who was shot and killed by the Milwaukee police officer on Saturday, leading to Saturday night's riots. Now, there's a lot of crazy in there. There is a whole lot of conspiratorial crazy. But there is a huge grain of truth running through it, and that is that Patrick Smith was the first and most important role model in Seville Smith's life. That he was the one who was tasked with teaching Seville Smith how to be a man. Patrick Smith is a career criminal. He said it himself. He's a pimp. He's a drug dealer. He's done everything wrong. But yet, in a rare moment of truth and self-reflection, he admitted, I failed. I failed as a parent. I failed as a man. I failed in my most elemental and basic responsibility as a human being, and that is to raise the next generation of human beings. That sort of candid honesty was, quite frankly, refreshing. That self-reflection was, quite honestly, very sorely lacking. Not just in the protests Saturday night, but in all of the, what's been euphemistically termed unrest in America over the last couple of years. There is no self-reflection. There is no ability to step back and say, hey, maybe we can't blame police officers for all of the problems in inner city America. Maybe, just maybe, there has been a cycle, a pattern of dysfunction that has run rampant for decades. Coming up after the top of the hour news, what caused that cycle and how it keeps on repeating. We will also take your phone calls. We recognize that this is a very important issue, and this is a very critical juncture in the city of Milwaukee, in the Milwaukee community at large. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear all perspectives. 799-1130, 1-800-838-9476, the PellaWI.com toll-free line. And in fact, I'm going to instruct our producer, Armin, because I want to hear all perspectives, I want to hear from people who took part in the riot. I want to hear from Black Lives Matter leaders. And I want to hear from them why it's acceptable that they keep voting for the exact same people who don't deliver the change that they demand. 1056 News Talk 1130 WISN. Dan O'Donnell in for Vicky McKay.
They like really not playing.
The riots in Milwaukee on Saturday. Last night, there were, I don't want to say riots. There was, this is the word games that the media plays here. Big headline in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel this morning. Did you see this? After uprising, unease. After uprising. Now, the hashtag that the rioters were using was Milwaukee Uprising. To call this an uprising is to give legitimacy to the rioting. All right? To call this unrest, to call this a disturbance, or an incident, or a protest, or a demonstration. What happened Saturday night, why was it that nobody in the media, it seemed, wanted to call this what it was, a riot? Why did nobody in the media seem to want to call the crimes what they were? Arson, battery to a peace officer, attempted homicide, disorderly conduct. No. We have to call these demonstrations. Because remember, this always has to play into the narrative that somehow white people are responsible, that somehow the system is responsible, right? The system. It's systemic racism in Milwaukee. After all, Milwaukee is the second most segregated city in the country, right? So we heard from Alderman Khalif Rainey on Saturday night, while this unrest, while this unease, while these demonstrations were going on and a wig store was being looted and burned, while 2 liquor stores were being torched, while a BP gas station was being burned to the ground. Do you know how dangerous a gas station on fire is?
Black Lives Matter, man. Rest in peace. That's all I gotta say. Black Lives Matter, man. Rest in peace, BG, man. That's all I gotta say, man.
As an African American who suffered from racism, who's been called the N-word in schools, I can tell you this, that you black people who've been voting Democrat, whose parents have been voting Democrat, you've become just as ignorant and just as racist against yourself as the Klu Klux Klan that was started by the Democrat Party. You should be ashamed of yourself, roll in your ignorance. Likewise, the Klu Klux Klan of the past that lynched blacks are rolling in their graves in laughter at you destroying your own neighborhoods and doing exactly what the Klan used to do, because they condition your minds to vote Democrat and destroy yourselves. You are the problem. And once blacks started voting Democrat, did they call each other the N-word? Black lives don't matter to black people when they vote Democrat.
Do you have any idea the potential for those gas tanks to ignite and explode? I mean, we're lucky there wasn't a crater in the Sherman Park neighborhood. There were 3 people inside that gas station when the rioters set fire to it. That's attempted homicide. If you set fire to a building, knowing there are people inside that building, you are attempting to kill them by setting fire to the establishment. And yet we're supposed to believe that this was a legitimate protest. This was an uprising against the political and socioeconomic establishment in the city of Milwaukee. And Khalif Rainey, the Milwaukee alderman, gave voice to this asinine ignorance.
This entire community has sat back and witnessed how Milwaukee, Wisconsin has become the worst place to live for African Americans in the entire country. Now, this is the warning cry. And where do we go from here? Where do we go as a community from here? Do we continue with the inequities, the injustice, the unemployment, the undereducation that creates these byproducts that we see this evening? Do we continue that? And I thank you, Russell Stamper. I thank you for not letting us leave here without saying the truth. Something has to be done here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin to address these issues. The black people of Milwaukee are tired. They're tired of living under this oppression. This is their existence. This is their life. This is the life of their children. Now, what have happened tonight may have not been right. I'm not justifying that. But no one can deny the fact that there's problems, racial problems here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that have to be closely, not examined, but rectified. Rectify this immediately. Because if you don't, this vision of downtown, all of that, you one day away. You one day away.
How can that be interpreted any other way than a threat to riot in downtown Milwaukee? I actually asked Khalif Rainey that very question on Twitter. I said, "Hi, Khalif Rainey, can you please explain to the city of Milwaukee how we should interpret your comments as anything other than a threat of more rioting and violence?" You know his response to a member of the media asking a legitimate question? He blocked me on Twitter. Now, I'm going to be nice and not give out Khalif Rainey's phone number and his email address. But everybody has Google on their phones. You can find it. I'd like you to ask Mr. Rainey whether this was a responsible thing for an elected official to say. This was pretty clear incitement of more rioting. I mean, is there another reasonable interpretation for what he said? I'd really like to hear it. And I'd really like Mr. Rainey to understand that he is not part of the solution. He is, in fact, along with every other liberal Democrat who has been elected in Milwaukee for the last 108 years, part of the problem. Because, in fact, Milwaukee has one of the highest poverty rates in the nation. By some estimates, it's second. Milwaukee has 3 of the nation's 25 worst performing schools. Only Chicago, a much bigger city, has more of the nation's worst schools. And stunningly, Milwaukee has had more socialist mayors in the last 108 years, 3, if you can believe that, than Republican mayors, 0. The last Republican mayor left office in 1908. Milwaukee, in the last 108 years, has become the single most segregated city in America. According to a study done by UWM, quote, no metro area has witnessed more precipitous erosion in the labor market for black males over the last 40 years than has Milwaukee. In other words, 40 years of near unanimous rule on the Milwaukee Common Council by people just like Khalif Rainey have led to the second highest poverty rate, one of the highest child poverty rates, one of the worst school districts, and the single worst city in America for black male unemployment. On top of that, the city of Milwaukee has the 5th highest violent crime rate in the country, trailing only Detroit, Memphis, Oakland, and St. Louis, all of which have also been controlled exclusively by the Democratic Party since at least the 1970s. Memphis has not had a Republican mayor since the city was settled in 1829. St. Louis, 1950s. Detroit, 1962, unanimous Democratic control. In fact, I challenge anyone, any local historian, John Gerda, name me the last time that Republicans or anybody who subscribed to conservative ideology had a controlling interest over the Milwaukee Common Council. I mean, we know it's been liberal Democrats for the last 108 years in the mayor's office. What about the Common Council? Honestly, the Milwaukee Police Department has been run by Democrats for decades. Nan Haggerty, Artie Jones, and now Ed Flynn, who I do still believe is a good cop deep down somewhere before he sold his soul to Mayor Barrett for another appointment as Milwaukee Police Chief before he rides off into the sunset and retires. I know he had his eye on the New York Police Commissioner job that ultimately went to Bratton. But he wanted to get one last appointment, so now he's doing Barrett's bidding. Once again, another liberal Democrat. But we have people like Khalif Rainey saying that those riots were a natural reaction, a natural response to all of the horrible policies that have led to horrible living conditions in the city of Milwaukee. Well, for a century plus now. A century plus. Who's been in charge? Do you realize the city of Milwaukee has gone as long as the Chicago Cubs have gone without winning a World Series? Everybody laughs at the Cubs because it's been 108 years. Well, I'm laughing at Milwaukee for 108 years of impotent, awful rule. 799-1130, 1-800-838-9476, the PellaWI.com toll-free line. Let's go to Ian in Milwaukee. You're on WISN.
What's going on on, Dan? How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, my friend. You?
I'm good. And when you're on Twitter, my friend, I am at bipartisan 2016, so you don't think it's some weird guy stalking you.
Oh, okay. Yes, All right, fair enough. I do see you all the time, and I appreciate your support and retweets, my friend.
My friend, I have to say it. And you know what? I'm a little disappointed in you today because you're being too nice. It's one thing when you say it, Dan, right?
Yeah.
But let me as a black person, a black conservative that so-called doesn't exist.
Sure.
Let me break it down. All of you listening, including Earl, who always calls Jay's show all the time.
That, by the way, is Earl Ingram. He's a former talk show host. There was a liberal talk station. It was like a black talk station, 1290 WNOV. I'm not even sure what it is now. I think they play easy listening. Yeah, that's him. That's him.
Earl and I have gotten to it on Facebook over this type of thing.
Sure.
So let me break down, and you understand this. It's one thing when you say it because you're a very astute and intelligent man. Forget the race thing.
Yeah.
But it's another thing when I say it.
It is.
All of you morons, it starts at home. I have family members that work for MPS. I used to always say, instead of wearing your T-shirts and marching and being upset at the governor, you need to be upset at your own leadership. But it starts at home. You guys need to stop having babies out of wedlock. You need to start getting married. You guys need to start educating yourself and stop blaming other people. That dude, Khalif Rainey, and my name is Ian, and you can find me, the Ian C. Jordan Show, my podcast. Khalif Rainey, you're an idiot. You're blaming everyone else but the people that are the problem. As a black man, you are disgusting. And I know he probably listens to the show. I know he listens to WISN. You're disgusting. And the block Dan, when he asks you a legitimate question, is asinine. And it goes to our point on the right all the time. Very simple solutions to some of these issues. Parenting and accountability.
Hey, my man. Ian C. Jordan. I love it. Ian, that was a fantastic phone call. I really do appreciate it, you lending your perspective. And I can always appreciate the real quick self-promotion that he snuck in there. That's my man right there. All right, go listen to his podcast. I'm sold. I want to hear more of that. Just wait until 12 noon. Or actually wait until like 12 midnight when, we don't have to be counted in the ratings here. And then you can listen to his show. But you know what? Have two phones, have his podcast, if he's going to self-promote, I'm going to self-promote the new national show on the iHeartRadio app, The Dan O'Donnell Show. It's a new weekly podcast. This week, I am going to be talking about how Milwaukee has descended into the chaos that we saw this weekend. In fact, one of my recent episodes is entitled, Do Black Lives Really Matter to Democrats?, in which I outline all of the statistics that I just ran through after a century plus of democratic rule, after 50 years plus of liberal Great Society era politics giving way to modern progressivism. The havoc that has wreaked on black lives in the city of Milwaukee. Can you honestly say that black lives matter more today to the people in charge of the city of Milwaukee than they did in, say, the 1950s? Can you honestly say black lives have improved? Here's a little stat. Sheriff Clark tweeted this out, and it's real tough to get accurate numbers on this, but supposedly the intact married black family unit before LBJ's Great Society programs was hovering around 93%. There were just 7% of African-American children born out of wedlock in 1962. After the Great Society, and after 50 years of learned government dependency, we do know that right now, the out-of-wedlock child birth rate for African-Americans is something like 73%. Is that progress?
Let me get this brick about the street. Hey, you guys, go put your hand on that brick.
That gas station still gonna blow up. Hell yeah, we're gonna blow up. Random is a bitch. Everybody jumping somebody and shit.
As we go back to the phones and talk to Chris in Greenfield. You're on WISN. Hey, Chris.
Hey, good morning, Dan. Yeah, it's really unfortunate Mr. Smith lost his life. You know, every human life is valuable. But at the same time, you know, the guy has a history of criminal activity, and nobody has specifically addressed that. And if he would have been incarcerated for any one of his activities that might have been deemed illegal, he might be alive today. So I would have to say that the people who are most responsible are those who are failing us in the legal system, potentially Mayor Barrett, Chief Flynn, and John Chisholm.
I love that's old school, buddy. You almost said Areola. I love that.
I know. I'm sorry.
Chief Flynn. Going old school Milwaukee. I caught that. That's awesome. And Milwaukee County DA John Chisholm, correct?
Yeah. If these three guys would be doing their diligent job,
here's the thing.
This man would still be alive today.
I am not going to fault Chief Flynn, nor am I really going to fault Mayor Barrett on this. A guy like Seville Smith gets sort of passed through the criminal justice system. Obviously, his arrest record was such that the Milwaukee Police Department was doing its job with him. The problem was you had a district attorney's office, and we got a letter to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel from Kent Lovern, who's Chisholm's top deputy in the DA's office, saying that there was a witness intimidation case that Smith was involved in. It was a shooting, and Smith attempted to put pressure on one of the witnesses to keep quiet. Well, what happened, this thing wasn't prosecuted because it was, I think, the shooting victim didn't cooperate and said that he wasn't being intimidated. This wasn't witness intimidation. Seville Smith wasn't doing anything wrong. Well, Lovern said, okay, we can't prosecute when you've got the complaining witness essentially saying that there was no crime committed. Well, I took a call yesterday from Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark, who made an excellent point that this isn't the witness versus Seville K. Smith. This is the state of Wisconsin versus Seville K. Smith. So the state of Wisconsin, the prosecutors, the district attorney's office, can put this witness on the stand and essentially impeach him, which means not like Bill Clinton was impeached, but you basically poke holes in the story that he's going to be telling the jury. You say, okay, Mr. Jones, you said to investigators that Seville K. Smith intimidated you. Are you lying now? And you put him under oath and put him under the threat of perjury. And then you call the investigator who interviewed this witness, and chances are, if this was an interview conducted in a Milwaukee police headquarters, it was taped. It was videoed. So it's on video. You got this guy, and you can play this for him. And eventually he'll likely change his tune. Otherwise, he's going to go down for perjury. Okay? The district attorney's office chose not to do that. And all too often, we see the district attorney's office cop these plea deals that allow criminals, career criminals who don't deserve a second chance, let alone a 15th, back out on the streets. We also have a judiciary with very few exceptions. County Judge David Borowski seems to get it. I'm not convinced that any other of the 100-plus circuit court judges really do. They're signing off on this. They're giving these lenient sentences, and they're all subscribing to this theory. I know Vicky talks about this quite a bit. Disparate impact, i.e., if the impact of a particular law or a particular policy is such that it impacts a given race, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, whites, whatever it may be, then that policy or that law is presumed to be racist. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? It sounds, honest to goodness, insane. A higher percentage of African Americans, based on population, not higher number, higher percentage are convicted of first-degree intentional homicide. A leftist would look at that and say, okay, well, maybe the system is stacked, and the statute preventing or prohibiting first-degree intentional homicide is somehow racist.
Or maybe Bill and Hillary Clinton were the racists all along, as they make fun of blacks and never solve any problems within the black community. Robert Byrd was a Democrat senator, and he was the leader of the Klu Klux Klan. And here's Hillary Clinton kissing Robert Byrd, the Klu Klux Klan leader. Well, at least you now know why nothing improves for the black community when Democrats are elected to public office. Democrat leaders always keep blacks disenfranchised, distracted, divided, and demoralized in order to destroy us. It doesn't matter the race of the Democrat. The Democrat Party inherently is designed to destroy the black community. And here's the racist founder of Planned Parenthood, an organization that was designed and created to destroy the black community and exterminate blacks and minorities. This is Margaret Sanger, who said, "Colored people are like human weeds and need to be exterminated." And here's Hillary Clinton. She says, "I admire Margaret Sanger enormously, her courage, her tenacity, and her vision." Afterwards, Hillary Clinton, the Democrat nominee, calls the KKK Grand Dragon the heart and soul of America. Remember, the racist is a Democrat. Before the Democrats partner with Islamic extremists to push a big government agenda throughout the world, the Klu Klux Klan, which lynched blacks and destroyed black neighborhoods and burned down their homes, also was a terrorist arm of the Democrat Party. Would you be deceived and tricked into voting for a Klu Klux Klan sympathizer? Then don't vote for Hillary.
I mean, you smack your head at the idiocy, but this is the sort of thought process that leads to soft-on-crime criminal justice policies that are based more on social justice theories than actual justice theories. Let's go to Steve in Milwaukee. You're on WISN.
Hi, how you doing? Thank you. Yeah, so I was actually down there in the Sherman Park area yesterday afternoon. There's just a lot of things fundamentally that talk radio isn't understanding. I didn't see talk radio down there. I didn't see anyone down there. I didn't see anyone talking about a lot of the issues that are going on in the community.
So
or even trying to reach
what exactly were you doing down there, Tom? Or Steve, I'm sorry.
Steve. I was down there talking to people, showing solidarity and support for the community.
Were you cleaning up?
Trying to help out. Yep, trying to help out with clean up, but also talking to people. Just so
it sounds like you were just down there talking to people and
yep.
You know, see what I'm hearing. Have you ever heard of the phrase virtue signaling, Steve?
Haven't heard of that.
You haven't heard of it because you're kind of engaging in it right now. You're saying, well, I was down there. I didn't see talk radio. You know where I was yesterday, Steve? Just take a guess. Take a wild guess where I was all day and all night last night. I was covering this. I was doing my job to inform the people of Milwaukee about what was going on. All right. I didn't exactly have time to head down there. So you went down there to talk to people about the real issues. And that's great. You're signaling how virtuous and how much better than us in talk radio are. But I'm actually curious. What are some of those real issues that you alone saw?
Sure. So what I saw was, and talking to people, and living in Milwaukee, what I hear is there's much more going on than can be just solved by the community alone.
So like what?
Inequality system. Well, you could start with $2 billion of investment going to downtown for the better part of the last few years, and broken up homes, broken up communities.
Hold on, one second, real quick.
Investment going on.
Real quick. Yeah. I get you. Hold on a sec. $2 billion of investment. Last time I checked, O'Reilly Bumper to Bumper Auto Parts, national chain, invested in the Sherman Park neighborhood. Last time I checked, another national chain, BMO Harris Bank, which I don't know if you know this, but is the main sponsor of the Bradley Center, so a huge presence downtown, also invested in Sherman Park. Both of those businesses were destroyed, costing their parent companies millions of dollars, not just in property damage, but also in lost revenue. So,
look,
you don't have those.
I don't support that. I'm saying from the community.
Well, I'm saying from the community perspective, when you have investment in that community and that investment gets torched, what do you think the likelihood that BMO Harris Bank is going to want to risk, or their insurance company is going to allow them to risk building another bank branch right there with the possibility that it gets targeted in another riot? Do you understand where I'm coming from? That there is...
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so there's $2 billion...
I told him that, by the way.
There's $2 billion of investment in downtown Milwaukee. Yes, because A, there's no risk of a riot destroying the building, and B, there are quite simply more people in downtown Milwaukee than are in the Sherman Park neighborhood. So you got to understand that. You also talk about some of the systemic problems.
That's not true. That's not true. There's 25,000 people in the little pocket of downtown but that does not represent the overall Milwaukee community, especially
yes,
on the west side,
I know. But
which
when
is
you're
more
talking about
a larger
individual,
population.
right? But when you're talking about individual little neighborhoods, there's far more people concentrated in a very small spot. So a business like, let's say, for example, Dairy Queen is going to be much more likely to set up there simply because there's more foot traffic. There's more people who could potentially go there. Now, you talk about the systemic injustices and the systemic problems in Milwaukee, and you're absolutely correct. I'm not going to disagree with you. However, when's the last time someone in talk radio had any meaningful ability to affect change in the city of Milwaukee? Seriously. When's the last time anybody who thinks like me, anybody who talks like me, anybody who has the same political philosophy of me, of Vicky McKenna, of Jay Weber, of Mark Belling, of anybody, had any real meaningful power in the city of Milwaukee, had any real meaningful ability to affect change in downtown Milwaukee, in Sherman Park, on the far north side, on the near west side, anywhere? There's one guy I can think of. On the south side, Mayor Bob Donovan. He lost a mayoral election 70% to 30 this spring. We're talking about a 70% dominance by liberal Democrats in the city of Milwaukee, who have been in charge of the city of Milwaukee, and I'm not sure if you know this, Steve, for 108 years. So when you talk about the systemic problems in the city of Milwaukee and try to blame talk radio, that's incredibly disingenuous. Because talk radio has no real impact on public policy. You think Tom Barrett is taking his marching orders from Dan O'Donnell? You think he listens every day to hear what Mark Belling has to say? Yeah, that's a good idea. Tom Barrett, I saw Tom Barrett in the Christmas parade. He wouldn't even acknowledge me, for goodness sakes, okay? He's not listening. Yet all these problems on his watch, on Norquist's watch, on Meyer, go down the line to 1908. Common Council, controlled by liberal Democrats. Police department, liberal Democrats. Every social service department in the city of Milwaukee, run by liberal Democrats. It's not a Republican within 30 miles of City Hall. None. So yeah, we can talk about the systemic problems facing black neighborhoods. You can go down there and talk about them. But you really need to talk to the people in charge. Don't go on talk radio and do your virtue signaling about how much better you are because you're talking with the people on the ground. Talk to Khalif Rainey. Talk to Mayor Barrett. Talk to Russell Stamper. They're the ones who have failed the city of Milwaukee. 1139 News Talk 1130 WISN. Apparently, Mayor Barrett just told Channel 4 what I said. Riots hurt the city of Milwaukee because nobody wants to invest millions of dollars in a building and in merchandise if there's the potential that it gets burned to the ground. The O'Reilly bumper-to-bumper auto parts store, a national chain, invested, I'm just going to ballpark it, $5 to $10 million on that building and on all of the products that they had stocked there. BMO Harris Bank, several $1 million for that branch right there. Both gone. BP, you know the way that most of these businesses work, right? It's not the BP gas company that owns this station. It's a franchise. That means somebody who lives in the Milwaukee community has a multi-million-dollar loss. It's not the big, bad BP oil company, which is like a subsidiary of, what is it? It's British Petroleum. Golly, I forget. Which is the one which is Venezuela? Is that Citgo? I think that's Citgo. This isn't BP that covers these costs. This is the insurance company of some family in southeast Wisconsin that owns this particular franchise. Jet Beauty, that's somebody who lives in the Milwaukee area. You think they're going to have the ability to reinvest in that community? Dan O'Donnell sitting in for Vicky McKenna, News Talk 1130 WISN. Tom in Franklin, you're on WISN.
Hey, Dan, thanks for taking my call. Dan, I was listening to you yesterday about 2:30 in the afternoon, and about 2:15, there was breaking news on the radio on WISN, and they says that the officer that shot this guy was black. Now, did this first come out from Saturday night until Sunday afternoon at 2 in the afternoon?
Yep.
But now, okay, here's my question to you, Dan. In the meantime, you did have a caller. The guy was black. He was a black man, and he was very nice.
Wait, are you confusing me with Dan Connery? I think you are. Dan Connery was on at 2 in the afternoon yesterday.
Okay,
I didn't go on until 5.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I see what you're saying, though. Why wasn't the cop initially identified as being a black man?
Yes.
That's sort of the issue. Well, here's what happens. I have actually gotten to know Christopher Manny pretty well. I was the one who did the big interview with him a few months ago. And he was not identified. He said initially, it's for these cops' own protection. I mean, there was a riot Saturday night. So Milwaukee police actually had to get this guy to stay with some relatives and put a huge police presence around him because there were attempts to try to identify him, and that would have made him a target. So the decision was made not to put out any identifying information. Okay. Even though the fact that he was a black guy might have done something to sort of quell some of this anger. So it wasn't until a press conference that Chief Flynn at probably about 2:30, I think it started, so about 2:45, Milwaukee would have had this breaking news that, oh my goodness, the officer was a 24-year-old black man. So if Dan wasn't identifying him right when he got on the air, it's because he didn't know. Okay.
And see, this is why why in Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland, as soon as a white officer does shoot a black guy, that's the first words out of their mouth.
Well, it's white officer. Oh, and now, right, they're not saying it was a black officer. It was a black officer because these are the games that the media plays. I mean, why did the New York Times identify George Zimmerman, an Hispanic man, as a white Hispanic? I have never heard anyone else in the history of humanity described as a white Hispanic. President Obama had a black father and a white mother. Does that make him a white black? Is he a Caucasian African American? Is that how we describe him? No, it was just George Zimmerman because the narrative has to be maintained. As soon as the cop was identified as 24 years old, 6 years on the force, 3 as an officer after he went through the police academy. By the way, new class of Milwaukee police recruits just sworn in today. Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn presided over this ceremony. It's their first day. How would you like to go out on the streets and have to deal with this? This is why we here at News Talk 1130 WISN spent the entire month of July saluting law enforcement officers in our community. And this is why they all have my utmost respect. Because even though all of this nonsense was going on, even though they were being targeted as racist hate mongers by really an entire political party. I mean, you had the Democratic Party put the mothers of black men killed by police in prime time at their convention. Think about that for a second. You don't think that demonizes police? Yet they still sign up. They still go through the police academy, and they still swear to protect each and every one of us, even those of us who hate them. So we knew this officer was a 24-year-old black man, 6 years on the force, 3 years as an officer. Chief Flynn isn't going to identify him any further because it makes him a target. Protesters, rioters, and thugs will go out and demonstrate in front of his house. Chris Manny told me that for weeks, for months after his name was released, he had to have a cop 24 hours a day stationed outside his house. There were demonstrations that would go on outside of his house. There were crazies that would come to his door. There were people who would harass his children over this. I mean, it's a nightmare. I can't imagine what this police officer is going through. 24-year-old dude. I think of myself at 24. I think I was still in law school. I was, idiot young man. And this guy's got to live with not only having shot and killed somebody in the line of duty, but potentially being the target of violence himself for doing his job.
Black people, it's time for a blacklash. It's time to vote out every single Democrat politician. We black people have suffered the most in Democrat-controlled cities. The Democrat Party created the Klu Klux Klan, Jim Crow laws, and segregated schools. Our schools are still segregated because they reject school choice. Because all Democrat politicians are against school choice, which would allow black parents to take their children out of failing public schools and into successful private or charter schools of their choice. For decades, black people have suffered under Democrat leadership, whether it be locally, statewide, or nationwide, and we've suffered economically due to the highest recorded levels of unemployment, highest recorded levels of underemployment, and the highest levels of violence and deaths committed in Democrat-run cities within black neighborhoods. Stop voting Democrat. Remember, blacks have always been Republican. If Black Lives Matter to you, you'll vote Republican. Stop letting racist Democrats take your vote for granted. Meanwhile, Democrats use the very problems they themselves created to control people. The Republican Party is a party of solutions, the party of fixing things. And it's okay to be a Republican because we still believe in setting people free. The left, the Democrats, are only concerned about one thing, and that's control. And they disguise this control as charity.